You're about to hear something that will shake everything you thought you knew about prayer. A man walked into the jungle and never came back. At least, that's what everyone believed for 72 hours. His wife prepared for the worst. His children stopped asking when Daddy would come home. The mission board started drafting the memorial service. But here's what nobody saw coming. What even he couldn't have predicted as armed men shoved him deeper into the darkness of the Congolese bush. A baby deer. I know how that sounds, trust me. But stay with me, because what happened next isn't just a story, it's proof that God doesn't play by our rules when his people cry out. This is about David Mensa. Real name, real man, real scars to prove it. Not some legend passed down through 50 retellings until the truth got buried under exaggeration. David's 41 years old, born in Ohio, but his heart never felt at home there. Even as a kid building Lego churches in his parents' basement, he knew he wasn't meant for the American dream, the white picket fence, the 9-to-5 that slowly drains your soul until retirement finally sets you free. He wanted more, or maybe less, depending on how you look at it. He first heard the call sitting in a college chapel service. Boring Tuesday night, half the students scrolling through their phones pretending to listen. The speaker talked about unreached villages in Central Africa where people had never even heard the name of Jesus. Not once, not ever. Think about that for a second. Imagine living your entire life without anyone ever mentioning the one name that could change everything. That night, something broke open inside David. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, just kept seeing faces he'd never met, hearing voices speaking languages he didn't understand. His parents thought it was a phase. Young people get passionate, they said. Give it time. But time only made it stronger. By 23, David was raising support. By 24, he was on a plane to Kinshasa with 2 suitcases and a heart so full of purpose it hurt. That was 17 years ago now. 17 years of learning Lingala and Swahili, of digging wells and building schools, of sitting with village elders and earning their trust one conversation at a time, of burying children who died from diseases that have vaccines back home, of watching mothers weep over empty cooking pots, of preaching Christ crucified under mango trees while goats wandered through the congregation. If you think missions work looks like Instagram posts and heartwarming testimonies, you don't know the half of it. David could tell you about the dysentery that nearly killed him in year 2. About the militia group that burned down the first church he helped build. About the loneliness that creeps in at 3 in the morning when you haven't heard English in 6 weeks and you can't remember what your mom's voice sounds like. But he'd also tell you about the 70-year-old woman who got baptized last Easter, crying tears of joy because she finally understood why Jesus died. About the teenage boy who used to deal drugs and now leads worship. About entire families turning from darkness into light.
The work was hard, dangerous too. Everyone knew it. This wasn't the kind of place where missionaries get celebrity treatment. Not here. Not in the eastern provinces where governments exist only on paper and real power belongs to whoever has the most guns. David had been threatened before, roughed up twice, robbed more times than he could count. His wife Hannah worried constantly. The 3 kids, all born in Africa, knew what it meant to pray for Daddy's safety every single night. And then came October 14th. Nothing about that morning suggested it would be the day everything changed. David woke up, same as always, 5:30 a.m., before the equatorial sun turned his tin-roofed house into an oven. Prayed, read scripture, kissed Hannah while she was still half asleep, checked on the kids. Timothy, age 12, sprawled across his mattress like he'd been wrestling lions in his dreams. Grace, 10, curled into a tight ball, clutching her stuffed elephant. Little Samuel, only 6, mouth open, snoring softly. David touched each of their foreheads, whispered a blessing, felt that familiar ache of love mixed with fear. He had a trip planned, 3-day journey to a remote cluster of villages north of Butembo, places where the roads were more like suggestions and cell service was something you remembered from another life. He'd made the trip dozens of times before, always with local pastors, always careful. But careful doesn't mean safe, not here. Not anymore. With armed groups multiplying like weeds, each one claiming to fight for some cause while mostly just terrorizing civilians and stealing whatever they could carry. Hannah made him coffee, strong and sweet the way he liked it. They sat together on the porch, watching the sky shift from black to deep blue to that particular shade of orange that only exists in Africa. She didn't say what she was thinking. She never did. Didn't ask him to stay home or to be extra careful or to please come back to her. She just held his hand and prayed aloud, her voice steady even though her fingers trembled slightly. David memorized her face in that moment, not knowing why, just feeling like he should. The first part of the journey went fine. Too fine, maybe. The kind of fine that makes you uneasy because you know life doesn't usually cooperate this smoothly. David rode in a beaten-up Land Cruiser with two local pastors, Emmanuel and Claude. They sang hymns in Swahili, argued about soccer, shared dried fish and cassava bread. The road was terrible, but when is it not? They bounced along, dodging potholes the size of swimming pools, waving at children who ran alongside the truck, yelling, "Mundele, Mundele, white person, white person." David always waved back. They reached the first village by noon, preached, prayed with people, distributed some medical supplies David had brought. Standard stuff. Beautiful stuff. The kind of work that makes you forget about the danger for a while, makes you remember why you're here, why it matters, why you do it all over again, even knowing what it costs. An old man with cataracts grabbed David's hands and thanked him for coming. Said he'd been waiting 40 years for someone to bring the good news to his people. 40 years? How do you even process that?
Second village was smaller, poor. Hunger lived there, like an unwelcome guest who never leaves. Kids with swollen bellies, women with empty eyes. David's heart broke, the way it always did. A particular kind of breaking that doesn't make you weaker, but somehow stronger. He prayed for healing, prayed for provision, prayed for rain because the crops had failed again. Emmanuel preached about Jesus feeding 5,000 with a boy's lunch, and David saw hope flicker in faces that had forgotten how to hope. They planned to sleep there, push on to the third village in the morning. But then Pastor Claude got a message. A runner from another village, urgent. A man dying, requesting baptism before he slipped away. Could they come tonight? It was only an hour off their route, maybe two. David looked at Emmanuel. Emmanuel looked at Claude. Nobody wanted to say no to a dying man's request. That's not why you do this work. So they decided to go. Even though the sun was already setting, even though night travel was the first rule you learned to break. That decision changed everything. You ever notice how life's biggest moments hinge on choices that seem so small at the time? Left or right, yes or no, go or stay. David climbed back into the Land Cruiser, thinking about the dying man, wondering what his story was, praying he'd get there in time. He wasn't thinking about ambushes or abduction or whether he'd ever see his family again. None of us ever think about those things right before they happen. That's the terrible mercy of it. The road, if you could call it that, cut through dense jungle. Trees so thick they blocked out the moon. Vines hanging like cursed curtains. Sounds that made you wonder what was watching from the darkness. The headlights on the Land Cruiser were weak. One of them cracked and pointing slightly wrong. They crawled forward, Emmanuel driving, Claude navigating. David in the back seat with his eyes closed, not sleeping but praying, always praying. For the dying man, for the villages, for his family back home, for protection. And that's when they appeared. Not gradually, not with warning, just suddenly there. Figures emerging from the trees like they'd materialized from the darkness itself. 10, maybe 12 of them, all carrying weapons. AK-47s mostly, a couple with machetes. They blocked the road completely. Emmanuel hit the brakes hard enough that David's head snapped forward. Time did that thing it does in moments of crisis, stretched and condensed simultaneously. Every detail crystal clear. the smell of gun oil and sweat, the sound of safeties clicking off, the way one of the men smiled, not with humor, but with something colder, something that enjoyed the fear in your eyes. The leader, you could tell he was the leader by the way the others moved around him, approached Emmanuel's window. He didn't knock, just jerked the door open and dragged Emmanuel out, threw him to the ground. Claude went next, pulled out the passenger side, shoved face first into the dirt. David's hand went to the door handle, instinct to run, but 3 rifles were already pointing at his chest before he could move. Out, now.
The voice was calm. That was the scariest part. Not angry, not excited, just matter of fact. Like this was another Tuesday evening for him, just another group of travelers to rob or worse. David got out slowly, hands raised, heart hammering so hard he could hear it in his ears. The men searched him roughly, took their phones, their wallets, the medical supplies. Emmanuel started to protest and got a rifle butt in the stomach for his trouble. He doubled over, gasping. Claude helped him up, whispered something David couldn't hear. If you're wondering whether you should hit subscribe right now, the answer is yes, because this story goes places you won't see coming, and I promise you, you won't want to miss what happens next. Plus, if this encourages you, challenges you, makes you think differently about faith or prayer or God's protection, letting me know by subscribing helps me keep bringing you these real stories of real faith in action. Okay, back to the jungle. The leader studied them, his eyes moving from Emmanuel to Claude to David, lingered on David. Of course he did. A white missionary was valuable, everyone knew that. Ransom potential, political leverage, or just someone whose suffering would make international news and embarrass whoever was supposed to be keeping peace in this region. David could see the calculation happening behind those eyes, and his stomach dropped. "You," the leader said, pointing at David, "you come with us." "No," Emmanuel said immediately, stepping forward despite the pain. "He's with us. We're pastors. We're just—" The leader hit him, not with the gun this time, just his fist, hard across the face. Emmanuel went down again, blood streaming from his nose. Claude caught him, held him back, knowing that getting killed here wouldn't help anyone. "Take me," David said, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Let them go. I'll come with you, just let them go." The leader smiled again, that cold smile. "You come anyway. They stay alive if they drive away and forget they saw us. If they don't—" He made a gesture, universal language of threat, and David understood perfectly. They bound David's hands with rope, rough and tight, bit into his wrists immediately, shoved him forward into the jungle, away from the road, away from the truck, away from any hope of rescue. He looked back once, saw Emmanuel and Claude still on the ground, saw the fear and helplessness in their faces, wanted to tell them it wasn't their fault, wanted to tell Hannah he loved her, tell the kids he was sorry, tell them. But then the jungle swallowed him, and the road disappeared behind thick vegetation, and all he could do was walk. Part 2. You know what nobody tells you about being abducted? How quickly your mind shifts from panic to this weird, focused clarity? David's brain, pumped full of adrenaline, started working differently. Every prepper article he'd ever read, every security briefing he'd half listened to, suddenly downloading like emergency protocols. Stay calm, observe your captors, look for opportunities, pray without ceasing. That last one, that was everything. They marched for hours. David lost track of time completely, the way you do in darkness when fear messes with your perception. Could have been 2 hours, could have been 5. The jungle at night is a living thing, hostile and suffocating. Branches whipped his face, thorns tore his shirt, Roots tried to trip him every other step. Mosquitoes feasted on any exposed skin. He stumbled constantly, and every time he did, someone shoved him forward with a gun barrel or a curse, or both. The men didn't talk much, communicated in grunts and gestures, moving like they'd done this 1,000 times before. Maybe they had. David tried to count them, kept losing track. 10? 12? It didn't matter. Even 3 men with automatic weapons are too many when your hands are tied and you're miles from anywhere. They finally stopped in a clearing, really just a gap between trees where someone had hacked down enough vegetation to make a rough camp. No structures, just a fire pit and some scattered supplies covered with tarps. This wasn't a permanent base, just a waypoint. That told him something, though he wasn't sure what. Were they moving him somewhere else, holding him temporarily? Or was this where it would end, where his body would be left for the jungle to reclaim? Stop it, he told himself. Don't think like that. Pray. So he prayed, silently, desperately, honestly. Not eloquent prayers, not the kind of prayers you'd pray in church, just raw pleading. God, I'm scared. God, help me. God, protect Hannah and the kids. God, if this is it, let it be quick. God, I know you're here. I know you see me. I know nothing is impossible for you, but God, I'm so scared.
They tied him to a tree, thick rope around his chest and waist, arms still bound behind him. Uncomfortable, but not impossible. Could have been worse. Was probably going to get worse. One of the younger fighters, couldn't have been more than 16, brought him water in a dirty plastic bottle. David drank carefully, knowing he needed to stay hydrated, knowing they wanted him alive for now, or they wouldn't bother. The boy's eyes met his for just a second, and David saw something there. Not quite sympathy, but maybe recognition? Like the boy knew this was wrong, knew David was just a person, not an enemy, but had been doing wrong for so long he didn't remember how to stop. Thank you, David said in Swahili. The boy flinched like he'd been struck, walked away quickly, didn't come back. The night stretched out impossibly long. David couldn't sleep, couldn't get comfortable, couldn't stop his mind from racing through scenarios. Rescue felt unlikely. Emmanuel and Claude had probably reported me missing by now, but who would come? The local police were undermanned and outgunned. International authorities would take days to mobilize, if they came at all. Hannah would be losing her mind. The kids would be confused, scared. Timothy was old enough to understand something was terribly wrong. Grace would pretend to be brave. Samuel would cry and not know why. David's eyes burned, from exhaustion, from mosquito bites, from tears he wouldn't let fall. He'd signed up for this, understood the risks, but that didn't make it easier. Didn't make the ache in his chest any less sharp. He thought about quitting, about all those moments over 17 years when he'd wondered if he should just go home, take a pastorate in Michigan or Oregon, somewhere safe, where the biggest danger was church politics. But he'd never left. Couldn't leave. Not when there were still people who'd never heard. Somewhere in the darkest part of night, God showed up. Not literally. No angels, no light from heaven, no burning bush. Just this sudden, overwhelming sense of presence, of not being alone, of being seen, being known, being held by something bigger than fear or militia groups or jungle darkness. Peace that made absolutely no sense given the circumstances. Peace that shouldn't exist when you're tied to a tree, waiting to find out if you'll live or die. But there it was, settling over David like a blanket, warming places inside him that had gone cold with terror. He started singing, quietly, under his breath, an old hymn his grandmother used to sing.
Great is thy faithfulness, O God my Father. There is no shadow of turning with thee. His voice cracked, weak and off-key, but it didn't matter. He sang it again and again. Some of the fighters glanced over, looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Maybe he had. Or maybe he'd found it. Hard to tell the difference sometimes. Morning came slowly, gray light filtering through the canopy. With it came new reality, worse than the fear of night. The leader, the one who'd hit Emmanuel, approached David with purpose, pulled out a phone, expensive looking, out of place in this rough camp. Started filming. Say your name, he commanded. Where are you from? Who you work for? David understood. Ransom video. Proof of life. This would end up on YouTube, or sent to the mission board, or maybe both. Hannah might see it. The thought made him sick, but he complied. Said his name clearly, said he was American, a missionary. Please let him go. He had a family. He had done nothing wrong. The words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Like lines in a script nobody wanted to perform.
The leader stopped recording, seemed satisfied. David wondered how much he thought a missionary was worth. $50,000? $100,000? The mission board didn't do ransoms, everyone knew that. But these guys probably didn't care about policy. They'd demand money, make threats, maybe follow through, maybe not. All David could do was wait and pray and try not to imagine the worst. They gave him food eventually, cassava and some kind of greasy meat he couldn't identify, didn't want to think about too hard. He ate because he needed strength, because giving up wasn't an option, because something inside him still believed God wasn't finished with his story. The day dragged, hot, humid, bugs everywhere. His wrists bled where the ropes cut in. His back screamed from the awkward position against the tree. He dozed fitfully, jerked awake whenever he heard voices or movement. Late afternoon, an argument broke out among the fighters. He couldn't follow all of it. They spoke too fast and used dialect he didn't know. But he caught enough. Money, politics, something about moving to a different location. Some wanted to kill him now, get it over with. Others wanted to wait, see if the ransom came through. David's fate being decided by men arguing around a dying fire, and he couldn't even participate in the discussion that would determine whether he lived or died. The leader made the final call. They'd move at nightfall, take him deeper into the bush to a more secure location. Negotiations would take time. David's heart sank. Deeper meant farther from rescue, farther from help, farther from any chance of escape. But it also meant he'd live at least another day. Perspective is a strange thing in crisis. Night fell again, his second in captivity. They untied him from the tree, but kept his hands bound, strung out in a line with David in the middle. Started walking. No trail this time, just pushing through jungle that seemed determined to kill everything that entered. David's legs shook from exhaustion and dehydration and fear that wouldn't quite go away despite the peace he'd felt the night before. One foot in front of the other. That's all he could manage. Just keep moving. Don't collapse. Don't give them a reason. They walked for hours. David prayed continuously, sometimes words, mostly just groaning that he hoped the Spirit would interpret. Romans 8:26, the Spirit intercedes with groans too deep for words. He'd always found comfort in that verse, but never quite like this, never when groaning was all he had left. And then something changed. Hard to explain exactly what.
The atmosphere shifted. Some intangible thing David felt more than understood. The fighters slowed down, started glancing around nervously, muttering to each other. The jungle had been loud with night sounds, insects and frogs and things hunting things, but suddenly it went quiet. Not peaceful quiet, wrong quiet. The kind of silence that means predators are near, or storms are coming, or something has disturbed the natural order. The leader held up his hand, stopped the line. Everyone froze. David's heart hammered. What now? What fresh nightmare was this? He strained to hear, to see, but the darkness was absolute, the canopy so thick above them that even starlight couldn't penetrate. Then he saw it. Eyes, small, reflecting what little light existed. Low to the ground, maybe 30 feet away. Animal eyes had to be, but what kind? His mind ran through possibilities. Leopard? No, wrong shape. Hyena? Not this far in the jungle. Wild dog? Maybe, but those usually traveled in packs, and he only saw 2 eyes. The fighters saw it too, rifles raising, safeties clicking off with sharp metal snaps that seemed too loud in the silence. The animal stepped forward slightly, just enough that David could make out a shape in the darkness. Small, delicate, a deer, a baby deer. Couldn't have been more than a few months old, spotted coat just visible, huge eyes catching light that shouldn't exist. Just standing there, watching them. Not running, not afraid, just watching. "Shoot it," someone whispered. "No," the leader said. "Save the bullets. It's just a deer." But it wasn't just a deer. David knew it wasn't just a deer. Can't ask him how he knew. Can't explain the knowing, but every cell in his body suddenly understood that this was God. Not the deer itself, obviously. God's not an animal, but God working through the animal. God sending a sign. God saying, "I see you. I'm here. I'm moving. Wait and watch and trust me." The deer turned, started walking, not away from them, just perpendicular, picking its way through the undergrowth with impossible grace for such a young creature. And then it stopped, looked back, almost like it was waiting for something, for someone. "Weird," one of the fighters muttered. They started walking again, continued in their original direction. The deer paralleled them for a moment, then veered off, disappeared into the darkness. David's hands were still bound. He was still a prisoner. Nothing about his physical situation had changed, but everything had changed. God was doing something. God was about to do something. He could feel it building like pressure before a storm breaks, like electricity in the air right before lightning strikes. They walked another hour, maybe more. David's legs were going numb, his whole body screaming for rest. He stumbled, went down hard on his knees, couldn't catch himself with his hands tied. The fighter behind him yanked him up roughly, shoved him forward. David's knees burned where they'd hit rock or root. Couldn't tell in the dark, didn't matter. Just keep moving. God's moving. Trust him.
The deer appeared again, closer this time, maybe 15 feet away, keeping pace with them through the trees. Several of the fighters noticed, pointed, spoke in tones that mixed confusion with something that might have been unease. Animals didn't act like this. Wild animals ran from humans, especially groups of humans, especially armed humans. They didn't follow, didn't watch, didn't behave like they had purpose. "This is strange," the leader said, stopping again. He raised his rifle, took aim. David's chest tightened. "Don't!" he wanted to shout. "That's God! That's God moving! Don't you dare!" But he stayed silent, just prayed harder. The leader didn't shoot. Maybe couldn't shoot. Maybe the gun jammed, or he changed his mind, or God held his finger back from the trigger. He lowered the rifle, shook his head. "Leave it. Let's keep moving." The deer led them. That's what it was doing, David realized. Not following them, leading them, moving ahead,
stopping, waiting, moving again, like it wanted them to go a specific direction, like it had somewhere it needed to take them. The fighters didn't seem to notice the pattern, or if they did, they didn't care. But David noticed, David saw, and faith rose in his chest, fragile and strong simultaneously, belief that God was orchestrating something impossible. They'd been walking maybe 4 hours total when the deer suddenly stopped, stood completely still, ears forward, alert to something David couldn't hear. The fighters stopped too, sensing something was off. Voices drifted through the trees, distant but distinct. Other people, lots of them from the sound of it. The leader cursed, held up his hand for silence. They all froze, barely breathing, listening hard. Laughter, conversation, the sound of a community, a village living their evening life, cooking fires, children playing, normal human activity. They must have veered closer to civilization than the leader intended, probably got turned around in the darkness. The deer had led them here, David understood, right to the edge of populated areas where his captors wouldn't want to be, where witnesses existed, where rescue became possible. The leader made a decision fast. We circle around, go east, avoid the village, get back into deep forest. He jerked his head, indicated direction. The fighters started to move. David's heart sank. No, God, no! Not when we're this close, not when help is right there. That's when the deer bolted, not away, toward the village, running fast, crashing through undergrowth, making noise that seemed impossible for such a small animal, drawing attention deliberately. Several of the fighters cursed, brought their weapons up, but the deer was already gone, and the commotion had done its job. Voices from the village changed, became alert, questioning. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness, sweeping the forest edge. Someone shouted, asking, "Who was there?" The leader grabbed David's arm, knife suddenly at his throat. Make a sound and you die right here. The blade pressed against skin, sharp enough that David felt warmth, knew he was bleeding slightly. He stayed absolutely still, didn't even nod, just prayed harder than he'd ever prayed in his life. God, now, do it now, please. More flashlights, more voices. Someone was coming, multiple someones, checking out the noise. The fighters were trapped between choices. Fight and risk a battle they might not win, run and risk losing their valuable hostage, hide and risk being found. The leader was calculating. David could feel the tension in his grip, the knife wavering slightly. Then a new sound. Engine. Vehicle. A truck or jeep coming up a road David hadn't known was there. Headlights bouncing through the trees. The light swept across the forest and for one brief second illuminated their position. David saw the leader's face, saw fear there for the first time, saw the exact moment he made his decision. "Run!" he hissed to his men. "Leave him! Just run!" They ran, all of them, melting into the jungle like shadows, disappearing so quickly David almost wondered if they'd been real. The knife left his throat. His arm was released. He stood there, hands still bound, blood trickling down his neck, alone in the darkness, while flashlights and voices got closer. "Hello?" David called out, hoarse. "Help! I'm here, an American missionary. I was kidnapped." The flashlights found him. Suddenly he was surrounded by faces, village men with machetes and hoes, cautious but curious, speaking rapid Swahili he could only partly follow. Someone recognized him, knew his name, and had attended one of his services in another village. Word spread fast. The American pastor, the one who builds wells. He's here. He was taken. He's hurt. Hands untied the ropes. Gentle hands, concerned hands. Someone brought water. Someone else radioed ahead. David didn't know how they had radio, didn't care, just felt overwhelming gratitude. A woman pushed through the crowd, older, grandmother type, took one look at his wrists and the cut on his throat and clucked her tongue. Started barking orders in dialect, sent people running. They brought him to the village, not far, less than half a mile. sat him down near a fire. The women cleaned his wounds with water and some kind of plant paste that stung but felt right. Other people brought food, real food, not cassava and mystery meat. He ate slowly, hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the bowl.
Someone had called ahead. Within an hour, a vehicle arrived. Another missionary from a neighboring station came with local police and Emmanuel, dear Emmanuel, whose nose was bandaged, but who hugged David hard enough to hurt and whispered, "Thank God, thank God, thank God," over and over. They wrapped David in a blanket despite the heat and drove him back. Hours of bumpy road that felt like the smoothest highway in America. Windows down, cool air washing over his face. Alive, impossibly alive. Hannah didn't ask questions when she saw him, just held him and cried, her whole body shaken. And he held her back and cried too, not caring who saw. The kids piled on, arms everywhere. Samuel's small voice saying, "Daddy came home, Daddy came home." And Timothy trying to be brave but failing, tears streaming down his face, and Grace just gripping his hand like she'd never let go. Later, after showers and bandages and a doctor's exam and countless cups of tea, David told the story. To Hannah first, just the two of them in their room, her hand never leaving his. Then to the mission board via video call, to other missionaries, to the local church. People ask the obvious questions. How did you escape? What made them let you go? How did you find the village in the dark? And David told them about the deer, about how it appeared twice, how it led them to the village edge, how it made noise at exactly the right moment to draw attention. Some people nodded, like they understood. Others looked skeptical, like maybe trauma had made him see patterns that weren't there. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he was reading too much into animal behavior. But then Emmanuel added something David hadn't known. When they'd reported him missing, before any official search could be organized, Emmanuel had gathered the local believers, dozens of them, people from villages David had visited, people who'd been baptized, taught, loved by this American who'd given his life for them. And they prayed all night. Specifically prayed for God to send help, to guide David, to make a way where there was no way. An old pastor, man named Simeon, who'd never learned to read but knew scripture by heart, had prayed something specific. David got chills when Emmanuel repeated it. Simeon had prayed, "God, you led your people with a cloud and fire. Lead our brother now. Send your creation to guide him. Show him the way home." The deer. Now, David doesn't claim to understand how it all works. Doesn't know if God specifically created that deer for that moment or just directed an existing deer to the right place at the right time. Doesn't know if the animal knew it was being used by God or if it just followed instinct that God had woven into its DNA. It doesn't really matter, does it? What matters is that God moved, God answered, God did the impossible when all human options were exhausted. Some of you watching this are skeptical. That's okay. Skepticism isn't the same as disbelief. You're allowed to wonder, to question, to need more proof. David's not offended. He knows how it sounds. But he's also got scars on his wrists and a thin line across his throat and a wife who thought she was a widow for 72 hours and 3 kids who didn't know if they'd ever see their dad again. He's got no reason to lie about this. And here's the thing that really matters, the point of all this beyond just a dramatic rescue story. God is not distant, not theoretical, not just a theological concept you discuss in seminary classes. He's real and active and personal, and he responds when his people cry out. You might not get a baby deer. Your miracle might look completely different. But if you're willing to trust him,
Even when everything's dark and you're tied to a tree and rescue seems impossible, he'll show up. Maybe not how you expect, maybe not on your timeline, but he'll show up. David went back to work after 2 weeks. The mission board wanted him to take more time, maybe go back to the States for counseling, trauma processing. He refused, said there were still villages that hadn't heard, still people who needed to know about Jesus, still work to do. Can't let fear win, he said. Can't let evil silence the gospel. His captors had wanted to terrify him into leaving, into giving up. Best revenge was to stay. He still goes to those remote villages, still travels dangerous roads, still puts himself in situations that make Hannah pray harder than she'd like to admit. But something changed in him during those 72 hours. Faith isn't theoretical anymore. It's not hoping God can do something. It's knowing He will. Might not be comfortable, might not be safe by human standards, but God's got him. God's always had him. The deer proved it.
So whatever you're facing right now, whatever jungle you're lost in, whatever has you tied up and terrified and wondering if help will ever come, remember this story. Remember that the same God who sent that deer is the God who sees you, knows your name, hears your prayers. He might not send you a dramatic rescue, might not happen in 3 days, might take longer than you want, hurt more than you think you can bear, but He's moving, even when you can't see it, even when evidence suggests otherwise. He's there, orchestrating things beyond your understanding, working miracles in the darkness. If this story impacted you, if it challenged your faith or gave you hope or made you see God differently, drop a comment below. Not asking for amen or generic praise, but really what spoke to you. Have you experienced God's protection in impossible circumstances? Are you in a dark place right now, needing to hear that God still does miracles? Let's talk about it. This community isn't just about consuming content. It's about encouraging each other, building each other up, reminding each other that we serve a God who shows up. David's back in Congo right now. Last I heard, he'd baptized 43 new believers last month, built another well, started a school. The work continues because God's not finished with that place, not finished with those people, not finished with David's story. And He's not finished with yours either. Whatever chapter you're in right now, however dark it feels, God's got more pages to write, more miracles to perform, more impossible rescues to pull off. That baby deer didn't just save one missionary. It reminded an entire region that God is alive, God is active, God uses whatever He wants to accomplish His purposes. Some people heard the story and came to faith because of it. Others, already believers, found their faith strengthened, deepened, made real in ways it hadn't been before. That's how God works. One miracle ripples out, touches dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of lives. You're still here. Good, because there's more to this story that most people don't hear about. Parts David doesn't usually share because they're too personal, too raw. But he told me, and I'm going to tell you. The nightmares started about a week after he got home. Nobody warned you about that part. Everyone focuses on the rescue, the miracle, the triumphant return. But trauma doesn't care about miracles. It sets up shop in your nervous system and plays reruns at 3 in the morning whether you want them or not. David would wake up gasping, hands clawing at his throat, feeling the knife that wasn't there anymore. Hannah learned to sleep light, to reach for him in the dark, to whisper, "You're home, you're safe, you're home," until his breathing slowed and reality reassembled itself. The kids noticed. Of course they did. Kids always notice, even when you think you're hiding it well. Timothy started having trouble sleeping too, would wander into his parents' room asking questions he'd never asked before. What if it happens again? What if they come for you here? What if next time God doesn't send help? David didn't have good answers, just held his son and prayed with him and told the truth that yes, it could happen again.
Yes, missionaries die sometimes. Yes, following Jesus is dangerous and costly, and there are no guarantees except that God is faithful even when everything goes wrong. Grace stopped eating properly, lost weight. The school teacher pulled Hannah aside, concerned. Grace had written an essay about her dad disappearing and everyone thinking he was dead, and how she prayed so hard her throat hurt, but didn't know if God was listening. The teacher thought maybe Grace needed counseling, maybe professional help, processing the trauma. Hannah thanked her, said they'd look into it, then went home and cried in the shower when nobody could hear. And Samuel, little Samuel, who barely understood what was happening, started drawing pictures. Same picture over and over. A man tied to a tree, stick figures with guns, and always a small deer in the corner, watching. The mission psychologist said it was his way of processing, making sense of the incomprehensible. Said it was actually healthy, better than suppression. But healthy doesn't make it easier to see your 6-year-old drawing violence.
That's it. That's the story. David Mensa, the deer, and the God who arranges miracles in African jungles when his people cry out. Thanks for staying till the end. Hit that subscribe button, drop a comment, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and keep believing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because that's when faith matters most. God's not done writing your story yet. Trust him with the next chapter.